This is breaking news from the Las Vegas Review-Journal, sponsored by Michael Gaughan's South Point Hotel, Casino, and Spa.
Welcome into the Las Vegas Review-Journal studios. I'm your Vegas Nation host, Cassie Soto, here with news that there will be a new signal caller in Las Vegas. A few hours into the tampering window on Monday, the Raiders announced that they have agreed to terms with free agent quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo. The Raiders have plans to sign QB Jimmy Garoppolo to a reported 3-year, $67.5 million deal with $44 million guaranteed. Now let's go ahead and bring in Las Vegas Review-Journal Raiders beat writer Vinny Bonsignor for more on this. Not signing yet, Vinny, and agreeing to terms here. Vinny, here is the big question. What does Garoppolo bring to the table for the Silver and Black?
Yeah, well, he brings familiarity with Josh McDaniels. Remember, he worked with Josh McDaniels in New England. Dave Ziegler, the Raiders general manager, is quite familiar with Jimmy G from his years in New England. He brings leadership. He brings a winning pedigree. Remember, Jimmy G has been to a Super Bowl with the 49ers, multiple conference championship games. The record for the 49ers was really good when Jimmy G was healthy and playing quarterback for them, not so good when he wasn't playing for them, up until this year when they brought in Purdy, kind of stabilized it when Jimmy G went out. But he's a winner. He helps win football games. He's not the best quarterback in the league, but he's already proven that if you put enough around him, he could get a team or help get a team to a pretty high level.
Yeah, you mentioned health, and of course that's one of the 1A, 1B sort of conversation there with Jimmy Garoppolo. And so let's start there, Vinny. What do you say to fans who are concerned about his injury history as is set to join the Las Vegas Raiders?
It's a valid concern, and this contract makes sense, even though you could tell that injury was taken into account with the amount of money that he got, which is not as much as what Derek Carr got with the Saints, what Derek Carr was going to get paid here if he had stayed with the Raiders, and Daniel Jones in New York. So this is a pretty moderate contract compared to some of the others we've seen being handed out just in this offseason. But the injury concern is real. As we saw, Jared Stidham just left for the Denver Broncos, so there's no real viable backup here right now with the Raiders. I would expect that to change, and I would think that it's going to come primarily from the draft, and that becomes a big component here. Getting Jimmy G in, it looks like about a 2-year contract when you really look at the, dig into it. 2 years, about $44 million guaranteed. It could go to 45 depending on some incentives that he hits. So it's really a 2-year, $22.5 million a year contract, which is $11 million less than what Derek Carr would have made last year. And if you look at the next 2 years, $44, maybe $45 million over the next 2 years compared to $73 million, which is what Derek Carr was scheduled to make in 2023 and 2024. That's money now that the Raiders can use to fix some other problems. And we all know when you look at that defense, when you look at the offensive line, there's a lot of holes due to some really bad drafting here over the years that the Raiders need to close. They have some more cash now on hand with Jimmy G rather than Derek Carr to fill some of those holes.
Yeah, you mentioned the draft. Of course, that's on everyone's calendar here coming up next month when the Raiders are slated to pick at number 7 overall. If they stay there, right, what do you expect the Raiders to do at that pick?
It's a good question. I think that's the one thing that Jimmy G provides, a little bit of coverage at that position now in terms of not having to force it potentially at quarterback. Look, the Raiders were in conversations with the Chicago Bears about trading all the way up to number 1. I would expect them to investigate looking to move up maybe to number 3 with the Arizona Cardinals. Who knows, maybe even number 2. But if they're in love with a C.J. Stroud and they feel like the only way they can get him is by moving up in the draft. But they're not now because they do have Jimmy G in the fold. They're not. There's not an urgency to do that. They could be a little bit more patient as that goes. Maybe they wait at number 7 and there's a Will Levis available there, or maybe even Anthony Richardson, or maybe they just dial back to quarterback later on in the draft. Hendon Hooker from Tennessee could be there in the second round. Jake Haener from Fresno State will be there probably on day 2, day 3. So there's other options now because they've closed quarterback for this year and next year at least. It gives them an opportunity to be a little bit more selective and less urgent at that position, and be able to use some of those higher draft pick assets to attack other needs on this team.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the familiarity in the beginning of our hit here. And in case fans are just joining us here, of course, the Raiders have agreed to terms with quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo. He's set to join the Las Vegas Raiders here. But you talk about the familiarity. How important is that, not only for Jimmy G, a new player coming in, but for Josh McDaniels to make a stand here, for Dave Ziegler as well, to get someone that they're familiar with as they try to improve this Raiders roster?
Yeah, it's pretty huge, actually. And I think there's some things that Jimmy does differently than Derek Carr that might suit or fit Josh McDaniels, what he's looking for a little bit more. So that's definitely going to help. Also, Jimmy Garoppolo, not to take anything away from Derek Carr because he was good in the locker room as well, but Jimmy G just sort of has a way about him that teammates really respond to. You can see it on the field. He's played injured. I know he's been hurt and where he's missed games, but he's also gutted it out and been out there and played and helped his teammates, even on days where he wasn't necessarily feeling all that good. That resonates pretty strongly in the locker room. There's going to be a younger quarterback in here in some form or fashion, and I think Jimmy he's already shown with Trey Lance, that he's going to handle things as a professional and as a gentleman. And be there as a advocate and an asset for whoever the young quarterback is in terms of teaching him the terminology, showing him how to be a pro. There aren't that many, better examples than Jimmy G in that regard. So there's a lot of ways that he can help this team. And beyond all of that, if you put a healthy Jimmy Garoppolo in this lineup with Devontae Adams and Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow and Colton Miller and Josh Jacobs, you ought to be able to figure out a way to be competitive offensively. The big issue for the Raiders, obviously, is defense, but setting that aside for a second, a guy like Jimmy can come in here and really operate this offense at a nice level. He just needs to stay healthy, but if he does, then everything else kind of comes together on that side of the ball. And really now, aside from some tinkering on the offensive line, the Raiders could really pour a lot of their remaining money in the budget to defense and free agency, and a lot of their draft picks also to defense. So expect a lot of action now moving forward on that side of the ball now that they got the quarterback squared away.
Yeah, you say healthy, and I know that will be a key word here moving forward. Well, in more Raiders quarterback news, Vinny, Jarrett Stidham is staying in the AFC West, just not with the Raiders. He is headed to Denver to join Sean Payton and the Broncos. I'll be honest, Vinny, I did not see this one coming. Jarrett Stidham moving on from the Raiders.
Well, the minute it happened, I texted somebody. I go, "So Jimmy G's coming, right?" So that was basically, I think Jarrett was just waiting to see what happened in that regard. Obviously, if Jimmy G doesn't sign with the Raiders, then he wants to stay here in Las Vegas and try to win a starting job over a rookie or whoever the Raiders, would have brought in. But the Raiders telling Jarrett, "Look, we're closing it in on Jimmy Garoppolo," that let Jimmy Jared know it's time to look for another job. And it would have been hard probably for him to come back knowing for sure he was going to be the backup. I know you say, well, Vinny, he's going to be the same thing in Denver, but there's just a little bit of a psychological difference. I think he had his heart set on potentially being a starter or competing for a starting job here with the Raiders. That's not going to happen now with Jimmy G. So he'll go someplace else, even as a backup, which you would have been here in Las Vegas. But from a psychological standpoint, it's a little bit easier to digest that moving someplace else than it would have been coming back after starting these last two games with the Raiders last year as the decided backup.
A last one for you, Vinny, here as we wrap up. Just again, your overall thoughts here. How do you talk to fans and tell them, hey, don't hit the panic button yet as the Raiders enter this upcoming season, reportedly with Jimmy Garoppolo under center there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long offseason. There's a bunch of different ways the Raiders can improve this team through the draft, through free agency. And really, it's all going to be what happens during the season. And if there are improvements being shown by the Raiders from a roster standpoint, from a roster construction standpoint, to an offensive efficiency standpoint, to maybe the defense improving, how much any of that translates into actual wins and losses and all that, we're going to have to see. Football can be a pretty fickle sport. It was we saw last year. The Raiders lost 9 games, of one score or less. And a bunch of those they had big leads in the second half and just couldn't hold on to them. It's hard to tell them now, don't hit the panic button. I get it, I understand it. You're looking at Jimmy G, and there's a lot of Raider fans that aren't 49er fans, so that plays into it a little bit. But here's the deal I know about fans and sports in general. All it's going to take is some winning, and Jimmy G going out there and doing his thing and staying healthy and helping this team win. And usually when that happens, the fans will come on board.
Awesome stuff, Vinny. Thank you so much. As always, really appreciate you keeping us up to date on all things silver and black. That was Vinny Bonsignor, once again, Las Vegas Review-Journal Raiders beat writer. For more about Jimmy Garoppolo and all of your Raiders news, you can follow our fast takes and smart coverage at vegasnation.com, and be sure to catch our wrap-up of today's events at LasVegasReviewJournal.com for 7 at 7 newscast. I'm Cassie Soto. Thank you so much for joining us.
You've been watching breaking news from the Las Vegas Review-Journal, sponsored by Michael Gaughan's South Point Hotel, Casino, and Spa.